Hello world, and welcome to this edition of Tech on Fire with Blaze. Today we're going to be looking at networking as it relates to virtual machines on Azure. In today's episode, we're going to be revisiting networking. We've already talked quite a bit about networking in some of our previous videos when we talked about the OSI model networking from the security perspective and then how routing works. And today we're going to be looking at networking as it relates to Azure VMs. We've already talked about series of VMs on Azure. We looked at the different kinds of ratios between CPUs and RAM, and we've already talked about storage on VMs. So the last component that we're going to mention is the networking components, which is really the NICs and what they connect to, which would be subnets and VNets on Azure. And then we're going to talk about how you can expose these to the public internet, as well as put some security in place to protect these Nic cards once they're attached to a VM and running. The minimum set of components needed to get a virtual machine connected to a network consists of obviously the virtual network and the virtual machine and the Nic card, and then the subnet. Azure only allows a single NIC to be connected to a single subnet on a virtual network, but it is possible to connect a virtual machine to multiple subnets, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Now, once that NIC is connected to that subnet, you can apply security to it by way of network security groups. And network security groups are essentially layer 3 and layer 4 firewalls where you can apply rules to filter traffic based on ports and on solder blocks. So you can check out our previous video on how firewalls work in the link below. But once you have that network security group in place, you can take your virtual machine and extend it to the public internet by way of a public IP address. And the way this works on Azure is Azure will take a public IP address and pair it with a backend private IP address. And all the traffic that is incoming to that public IP address will then just be forwarded on to that backend private IP address in a one-to-one correlation between those two IPs. And you can still apply all the same rules to that traffic with your network security group, whether it be a private IP address or all traffic coming in on a public IP address. Now, as I mentioned, you can attach a virtual machine to multiple subnets, and the way you do this is by simply adding another NIC to the virtual machine and then attaching that NIC to another subnet. So this allows you to have more robust network security in place by having layers in your network. And a virtual machine on Azure will minimally support 2 NICs. Some virtual machines will support multiple NICs, going up to, I think, up to 8 NICs on some of the higher end VMs. But minimally 2 are supported, so you can even have multiple layers within your infrastructure as a service implementation on Azure with even simple VMs that only support 2 NICs by chaining these NICs together by way of subnets. So you could have a front-end subnet that is essentially for your incoming traffic. You could have a middle subnet that is used for your web APIs and your services that are being talked to by your front-end web servers, and then your back-end subnet that is used for things like databases and other data stores that is 3 layers removed from the front end. And in each of these layers, you can have built-in security mechanisms to prevent traffic that isn't allowed from other subnets to be traversing those networks as you get further back into infrastructure as a service on Azure. So with simple VMs, you can create rather robust networks on Azure without the need to have a single NIC talk to multiple subnets or even multiple networks for that matter. For this demo, I want to look at a virtual machine that I have deployed in the Southeast Asia region on Azure. And the reason I want to use this VM is because this VM allows me to connect over the internet to that virtual machine server on a VPN, because I have a VPN server running on this virtual machine, and it appears as if I'm in Southeast Asia. This is very similar to a private VPN running on the internet that you might be able to pay for, like NordVPN or some of those services. But this one I am self-hosting on Azure, so it's actually really easy to do with OpenVPN. Now, let's take a look at the virtual machine itself that I'm running here. This is a really small virtual machine. In fact, it's running a 1BS, which is 1 core and 1 gig of RAM. So that is more than sufficient to run what I'm running here. Notice I have the public IP address assigned to this. I have a virtual network and subnet assigned to this. And then I have a DNS name, which I'm going to be using to connect to whenever I go to actually run my virtual machine client on my local machine here. Now with this, I can go look at some of the other stuff I have set up on this virtual machine that are in this same resource group. Let's go ahead and take a look at the NIC here. The Nic Card is the only one associated with this virtual machine. It has a private IP address of 10.0.0.4 and a public IP address of 13.67.65.44. And there's one-to-one correlation between these two IP addresses. So all the traffic that comes in on this IP address gets forwarded to this private IP address. And this is within the range that's defined by this subnet here. So I can go in here to this virtual network, and let's take a look at this virtual network and then look at the subnet that I have defined here. So the virtual network has an address space of 10.0/0.0/16. So basically, these two octets are the host address, and these are the network addresses for this given network here. And then I only have one device on this VNet, so it's just the virtual machine. But you could literally have, up to 65,000 devices or so connected to this if Azure would support that on this same VNet, or I can carve it up into subnets like I have here. So this particular subnet I have defined as a /24, and it only has 250 available IP addresses because there's some of those are reserved for Azure to use for other things. So this VNet has one subnet and I only have one client on this VNet, but if I wanted to, I could literally add thousands of devices to this if I carved it up into other subnets and then attached more NICs to it and so on. Let's go back to the resource group and then let's look at the network security group that's attached to the NIC here. So go back in it by way of this link here. Now this network security group here defines rules that allow me to connect to this virtual machine on certain ports or deny on certain ports. Notice I have 3 ports that are defined here. 22 for SSH, 1194, that's the one that OpenVPN uses. Then I have 443 for a little admin panel that I have defined as well. And then these other rules are more low-level rules that Azure is applying by basically allowing all the VNet traffic inbound to this or load balancer traffic and so on. And these are kind of catch-all rules that Azure provides by default. And I can actually remove those if I want, but you can define some rules based on just the kind of traffic, like load balancer traffic, for instance. You can allow that in versus port and CIDR block traffic. But in any case, this the important rules here that I'm interested in are these port rules that I have defined here. So once I have the rules set up on my network security group, I will basically drop anything that doesn't match those rules. Now that I have my network security group defined, my NIC defined, I have my public IP address, my VM. Here's my disk. We did mention disks in our last video, and it's a small disk. It's just a standard HDD disk that's running a premium SSD, not a standard, premium SSD disk running 30 gigabytes in size. So it's a fairly small disk, which should be fine for this. That's actually more than enough to run this application. So let's go ahead and connect to this guy. I'm going to go into my virtual machine here and then get the DNS name for this. And then I'm going to open up a new tab in my browser. Let's get out of full screen mode and let's pop that address in. And put HTTPS because that's on port 443. And let's see if this opens up. And there I am. I'm logged in already. So I can download this profile here. This is basically a very basic OpenVPN server that allows me to create profiles and download those. And that downloads essentially a configuration file. But I already have this configured on my OpenVPN client here. So actually it's called Blaze 12. So if I connect to it, it will connect to that virtual machine by way of OpenVPN. Now, it's going ahead and providing me that connecting, it's configuring it. So let me open up a new tab here and incognito mode, so it doesn't use any kind of cache for where I'm located. And it should show me as in Singapore. There I am. It's showing me as being located in Singapore because my IP address is in a slider block that is associated with Singapore because my virtual machine is running in Singapore. So you can see how I can use a virtual machine to running on Azure with the VPN to kind of put my presence in the world anywhere I want to be. Now, it doesn't mean you have to do it for this purpose. You can use virtual machines on Azure for any number of reasons, but this is just one simple use case that I use. Sometimes when I'm out on the road traveling, I want to use a virtual machine using a VPN to secure my traffic when I'm in a hotel or in a coffee shop or something like that. Well, today we looked at networking as it relates to virtual machines. Next time we're going to be looking at how to use Cloud Init and VM extensions, how you can configure virtual machines automatically whenever they get created on Azure. So thanks for watching this episode of Tech on Fire with Blaze. If you like this content, please consider visiting us online at www.wintellect.com, and there you can find about services that Wintellect offers, including training and consulting services. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon to get notifications when new content becomes available, and also comment down below. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheOneMule, and also follow Wintellect on Twitter at WintellectNow or at Wintellect. We are constantly posting things about Azure-related technologies and things related to software development. You can also reach us by email at consulting@wintellect.com. Until next time, thank you.